Welcome to another episode of the Devil's Rest Book Club, where we dive into the details of Christopher Rocchio's Sun Eater universe. I am the naked street preacher screaming from the scaffolds about how the world is ending, Cameron, and with me, as always, is my co-host and the cleansing flame to burn away my sins, Drew. Drew, how you doing this week?
Doing great. This week we're going to be covering chapters 27 through 29 of the first book of the series, Empire of Silence.
So where did we leave Hadrian off last week, Drew?
So last week we ended with Hadrian narrowly escaping death amidst a horrible storm on Amesh in the midst of the streets of Borosevo. He's sort of walking through the streets. No one's helping him. He's stuck there, and we'll be reminding readers here that this is terribly dangerous because people drown in the street when people are stuck out in these storms. Wanders into an alley, is thinking about resting and stuff like that. He has got no options, and here's a voice call out. We learn that this voice is named Cat, who is a person who is a local here on Amesh, who helps Hadrian up, is really kind of kind to him, and sort of begins to nurse him back to health a little bit, get some medication. He has some moments with her. She seems nice. They're sharing maybe some curiosity, but there's also a distance between them because of their differences. Ends the chapter sort of saying he doesn't have family and, kind of hiding his ring at the end of this chapter. And we're sort of left with a question mark about what's going to happen with the two of these folks. So we kind of pick up here.
And we pick up with chapter 27, Forsaken. So a theme that we'll see over the next few chapters, he had mentioned it in one of the previous chapters about how to even tell the story. We have no idea. We have very little idea. Maybe with context clues, you and I can sort of piece together a little bit more of the timeline. But the timeline is not as nearly as distinct as it will be later in the series. This is a time that blends and melds together for narrator Hadrian.
Yeah.
It's hard for him to dictate and put on the page. And so we get an indiscriminate amount of time between him not telling Cat about his family into the beginning of this chapter, which is where they are begging in the plaza that sits outside of the Chantry's dome of Borosevo in the White District. As a reminder for the readers, the White District is the district that sits below the ziggurat upon which the Count's palace is. So they're in a nice part of town. I picture the Vatican, right? That's what I picture in my mind when I envision this scene because of the layout of the plaza. They are on, if you've ever been to the Vatican, there's a huge area where, and there's apartments where the Pope comes to speak and all this different stuff. Again, I'm Protestant, I'm not Catholic, so I can't speak to all the intricacies of the Vatican, but that's sort of the image that I get. Picturing this, they're on a corner outside of this central plaza area, and in that central plaza area are a bunch of plebeians that are unable to make it inside of the Chantry's enclosed dome to get with service. It's unclear on whether or not that is like their lot in life because they're plebeian, or maybe they just got there late and everybody's doing it or whatever.
Right.
Hadrian makes note of that fact that he's surrounded by plebeians who are far away from the dome, but still consuming the media from the prior, whoever's giving a speech on like what we would envision. You've been in an overflow room in a megachurch or have seen the idea of it, right? Like TV screens are up outside on these pillars that are showing the prior speaking. And in the midst of that happening, like the real service, real Chantry giving this speech, there is a naked man sitting on a scaffold who is giving like this fire and brimstone street preacher mad speech. Take a mentally unwell homeless person with no clothes and take a street preacher and put them together.
Yeah.
And they are this guy who is bearded and yelling from this scaffold. A lot of the people that are in this area of where Hadrian is sitting are afflicted with the gray rot, the plague that has spread through Borosevo that took Cat's mother. But there are more of them than that with mutilations from the Chantry like on their bodies. He mentions the fact that he sees a bunch of different crimes, right? Listed on their foreheads, carved into their skin. And he said the majority of them were men, but they are all in this one area, I guess, seeking the forgiveness of their sins or listening to this guy. We're really unsure. But this sounds like prime begging real estate. which is
Yeah.
why Hadrian and Cat are here. And it's relatively safe because they are outside of the Chantry, so that like they can't be, picked up at the spaceport because the clientele are getting upset. It's like everybody and their mother is out here. Even
Right.
the rapists and murderers and people who've committed assault are
Many
out.
heretics as well.
To your point, heretic
Yeah.
comes up twice, right, in that list.
Multiple times. Yep.
So there are a lot of criminals here.
Mhm.
But there are also wealthy people that have to pass along this way in order to get into the Chantry's dome, which is why they are on this corner, so that they can try and get as much money as they can from the charity of whoever walks by. I wanted to specifically read the portion of this naked, they call him a vate, I think it is.
Yes.
Which is like a street preacher. It's like in the lexicon in the book, it mentions that is like a preacher who has not been ordained by the Chantry. He says at the beginning of his things, "Our mother, the earth who was and will be again, has turned her face from us. These pale devils are her punishment for the vanity of our ways. Mark me, brothers and sisters, children of earth and sun. Mark me, for the punishment is coming, a cleansing fire that will wash away our sins. Repent, repent, and be clean again."
Dude, did this hit you like a bomb when you read it too?
Totally missed it my first time.
Yep.
Totally missed it. Don't remember this at all.
Yeah.
He is sitting yelling this to all these people with Hadrian right there.
Yeah.
And he is like, Hadrian is the cleansing fire that will burn away humanity's sins or whatever. He's sort of taking it through the lens of the Chantry's belief that Mother Earth is going to return and wash us of our sins. But in this case, he takes it as fire that is going to come back.
There's so much packed into this that is interesting. It's really shocking to me that it didn't stand out to me the first time I read it. But on a second read, this was like, you could have put highlighter on it and it wouldn't not even describe how much this stuck out to me. So first thing I noticed about this is our mother, the earth who was and who will be again. This feels like our Father who art in heaven. Like this feels 100%. Like the start of the Lord's Prayer. So this feels very indicative of a religious, this first section of this just feels like a religious convention about something that they might do, praising Mother Earth that will return again, this stuff. The pale devils are her punishment for the vanity of our ways. So this is really interesting. We've got this Cielsen scourge that is ravaging the known universe and is potentially a threat to humanity. I'm not sure how I missed the fact that this person is suggesting that they're a punishment of some kind for humanity, for our ways. And wondering if there's this commentary here, this world we've been displayed thus far in this story doesn't explicitly say anything about the Cielsen being a punishment, but there is a lot morally wrong with the world we're being presented. We've got...
From our perspective,
right, as the reader. So we've got, dramatic inequality. We've got massive differences in genetic disparity through genetic alterations,
technological disparity,
breakdowns of family. There's just a gigantic number of issues that have been developed here. The thing that immediately popped into my head when I was reading this is is this Noah's flood in Rockio's universe, where instead of a flood, the universe sends the pail or something like that? It'd be interesting.
That is interesting.
I didn't even think about it until I read this. I'm like, we talk a lot about, New Testament God in our culture, but we don't talk a lot about Old Testament God kind of stuff. And this feels like an almost Old Testament expression that he's describing here, that, we're being sent this massive punishment, and the cleansing fire will be the thing that washes away our sins somehow. There's an intensity to it.
There's a very Christian image too, to some extent. I mean, there's punishment, I guess, in the fire there. In his sort of fire as like a fire and brimstone analogy is very familiar to our culture and things like that. I'm sure our listeners have had plenty of experiences of seeing people who are standing on a soapbox screaming that the sins of America or wherever they are listening are going to be punished or whatever. Judgment is coming. Yeah, doomsdayers, that has been a through line with Christianity since the very beginning. I mean, people thought that even back in first century, the Christians thought Jesus was coming back very, very imminently. So it's sort of something that's inherent to, I guess, our religious politic as in a Western Judeo-Christian society, let's say.
Yeah.
But specifically the idea of fire washing away the sins it reminds me of I read Malachi into this a little bit when he talks about the refiner's fire. So if you have a precious metal that you have mined out of ore or whatever, it has to go through a refinery in order to become the 14 karat, the 24 karat gold that ends up at the very end, because you have to burn away the impurities.
Yeah.
So this is it. There's fire and brimstone associated with this, but there's also the cleansing of burning away sins so that purity can then emerge.
Yeah.
This seems very familiar to us, and we will pick up more with what this guy's message is throughout the chapter. I think Rakio does a really good job of spreading out the message that this preacher is doing as Hadrian sort of listens in on this speech.
I think it's super important to note that even if we're thinking New Testament, we know there's a lot of discussion about, forgiveness, love, all this stuff. But one of the things that is, I think, central to the Christian ethic is the forgiveness, the good news, so to speak, comes through suffering and then resurrection, right? It's death and then resurrection. It isn't
there is no resurrection without death.
It's not a painless process. And so this discussion of cleansing fire is this picture of the other side of this. It is good, but there is pain and suffering in the process of actually having the sin burned away. I can't believe I missed this.
Yeah.
That ethic like this is discussed this early. We have earlier chapters talking about the ugliness of the world and the suffering and trying to find the beauty amidst the suffering. We have an ethic sort of displayed here in this preacher about the forgiveness of sins having to happen through pain and suffering as well. So it isn't a pure lovey-dovey redemption ethic that's appearing a couple times. There's a mixed suffering before salvation message that is portrayed in kind of several spots here, and it's popping up here again, which I think is interesting.
You saw Noah in the flood in this. And another thing, if we take a step back and look at the scene from our perspective as well, it's a little John the Baptist-y, right? And from the perspective of there's a guy who is proclaiming the one who is to come.
Yeah.
And he's sitting right there with him, and he doesn't even know that he's there. Right, the cleansing fire is there in the plaza with him, and he does not know he's there. He doesn't go so far to say, "I'm not fit to wash this man's feet," or whatever it may be. That's similar to what John the Baptist says about Jesus. But that image of somebody from the wilderness calling and making the path, like for the eventual, I'll call it apocalyptic figure to come. It rings similar to me to that of John the Baptist preaching in advance of Jesus.
Yeah. Well, it is very interesting that, cleansing fire is mentioned here alongside our main character who tells us that there is this epic fiery conclusion to the story. Do you think that this is within the narrative a sort of happy coincidence, or is it something more mysterious going on here? Do you have a sense for that?
I don't think anything that narrator Hadrian includes is a coincidence. I think that what we know about Hadrian so far is that he is very smart and that he is crafting this narrative too, right?
Yeah. Yep.
We've seen that a little bit, and I'm not trying to take an overly pessimistic view, but there's a reason that narrator Hadrian is cluing us into this random street. Like, up to this point, we haven't heard anything about. I'm sure that these type of people existed on Delos, and maybe Hadrian just never interacted with them. But there's a reason that he's being mentioned. This street preacher is being mentioned.
Yeah,
for sure. We take a pause from that street preacher's narrative, which we will return to shortly, and we zoom in on Hadrian and Cat in this scene as they're begging, and Cat being slender and small. Hadrian, you imagine, is large, pretty large for a beggar. He may be skinnier than he's supposed to be in this situation, but he doesn't necessarily fit the bill with his genetics, with being tall, being pale, and all this different stuff, in comparison to Cat, who is slender and small and young, and a woman, and she is getting more sympathy than him, and thus is getting more coin than Hadrian is, as anybody who gives charity walks by. Hadrian and her, as whenever they get a free moment, they sort of laugh and joke about the fact that Cat is more successful at this than Hadrian is. But something that struck me about Hadrian in this scene, and we'll see it more in chapters to come too, Hadrian's not melodramatic here so far in Borosevo at all. He's not serious. He's not dealing with all these political problems. You had mentioned playfulness in the last episode at the very beginning of their relationship. That's clearly only grown.
Yeah.
So it seems like he's just in this very free-spirited, hippie
Living life
mode.
in the moment kind
Yeah.
of way. Yeah.
Present, very present.
Yeah. I didn't even catch that, but as you're describing that it is true. We have him living in this very, difficult situation alongside his new friend here, or however long friend at this point. And he isn't doing a lot of that. He's kind of just living with this person and making jokes and just trying to get by. I didn't notice that.
It seems that every time that there is a high litany or a mass, like the equivalent in this area, they do the same thing. So that this is not the first time that they've gone through this scenario. They've been to this corner before in this plaza, and they staked it out so that they can get some money. It's clearly not their first time. He makes a specific note about a woman who comes up and gives Cat a silver caspum, which is more money than he has in his whole basket. And this is the most money that maybe Cat has ever received from charity, because she stands up and then bows and thanks this woman profusely. And then he makes a note when narrator Hadrian thinks of kindness, he sees the face of this woman and her cheap lipstick.
Yeah.
Which sort of indicates to me an idea of the fact that this woman is giving not out of abundance. Like, she needs it more than maybe other. It doesn't sound like this woman that is this picture of kindness for Hadrian is Palatine, because Palatines wouldn't wear cheap lipstick, or maybe would never even give in this moment. But the fact that he mentions her cheap lipstick makes me sort of think this is more along the lines of the woman who gave her last 2 coins.
Yeah.
In the parable, than it is the noble woman who has in abundance and only gives a silver caspum.
Yeah. For those that don't know, there's this Bible story about, if a rich person gives a large sum at a donation, and a poor woman gives a penny, but that's everything she had, who is truly given more? And the idea is that the ethic is not about how much you've given, but how much it means to you that you've given it, and what does it represent to you?
How much of a sacrifice it is.
Right. It's about the sacrifice for others that is the true ethic, not just simply how much have you given. I didn't think about that, but that actually makes sense. It is interesting that he latches onto this person, and that may be why, is that this wasn't just a superficial act. There was something genuinely kind about what happened here.
We then get brought back into the preacher's narrative, and I'm actually going to read this piece of it, because going back to what we had said earlier, he sort of continues. We imagine that Hadrian sort of just picks up in this sermon as the preacher is screaming, "We have rejected nature," the Vate cried. "We bend the knee and the neck to lords made less than human." And here the naked madman clutched his own member with a gnarled hand, beard blowing in the wind atop his scaffold. "The mother knows the nobles have forgotten her and have worked her from their blood." The part of me that had been the Archon's son twitched, half expecting to see the prefects or even soldiers in the green and white of the Count's service march in to take the sun-crazed old preacher away. None came, for it is said the mad are close to earth. This speaks volumes into what this guy is saying.
Yeah. Well, it sort of represents, what I was saying earlier, that it isn't an empty critique he's making. So whether or not the Cielsen were literally sent as a punishment, he is calling out like a real form of moral degradation that he thinks has happened, where we've rejected our nature. This line about bending the knee and neck to lords made less than human, there's this sense of the people we worship as our lords are not even human anymore because of what we've done to ourselves. The entire structure is upside down.
Because of what they've done to themselves, not us.
Right.
He makes the distinction between the two.
Yes. And so it's very interesting that, Mother Nature is called here, because Mother Earth itself is sort of supposed to be this, religious entity, right? And yet humanity is diverged from. If Mother Nature returned, if Mother Earth returned, they may not recognize her children anymore, right? And so what would we even do? We've sort of left her in the dust, so to speak. So within the own philosophy, it actually doesn't make a lot of sense. So it's a real deep cut critique. I think that may be why Hadrian senses some nerves here of like, well, the guards are totally about to come get this guy, but they don't because of
Which is interesting because religiously, this guy is seen as close to Mother Earth, right? Whereas maybe if somebody who is preaching in this way is being significantly disruptive, you may see a police officer show up in our world and remove that person from public property if it's a threat to public safety. Now, there may be legal ramifications and issues for that because of freedom of speech that we have in our country. But in this case, where the society is way more restrictive, they're specifically not doing that, which is very counter to what we understand about the world. I just thought that was very strange that like they control everything. They control narratives. They control all this different stuff. This guy's literally screaming from a scaffold in front of the church that everybody that is in the nobility is like less than human. And nobody's doing anything about it.
This character, you know, writing him off as a madman is one way to read it. And I'm wondering if on a first read, I think I did. But, you know, on a second read, I really wonder if this character is supposed to be almost like a genuine, like soothsayer type character, actually connected to something that is giving him a read on actually what's happening here.
Almost like a Grecian oracle, right? Like in old classic tales.
So I would, you know, this is something that I wouldn't have thought about putting a pin in initially, you know, going into this reread. I really want to return to this character after finishing the final book in the series, frankly, because this is extremely interesting. And the more we find out about the universe, the more we may return to this, you know, prophecy-ish verbal vomit that appears initially. Seems pretty powerful and important. So I'm really curious to read this with full context at the end of the series. It's what an interesting, what on its face appears to be a throwaway character, but really the focus of this chapter, actually. Short chapter, but very powerful because of this character.
Rocchio does a beautiful job in this book so far of just when we think that we're focusing on other problems too, he always throws in something little, like if you're really looking for it. And I really don't think that any reader will catch it on the first, unless they are taking it as slow as we are. And maybe there are some people that are way smarter than me that are catching this on a first read through. He always brings us back to, just in the moment that we've gotten so caught up in Hadrian's story and Hadrian's problems or whatever, the end. He brings us back to the end. It's something I noticed too. I didn't even read the back of the book before we started this.
I didn't.
There are 4 billion people. Like it says on the back of the book, there are 4 billion people that die as a result of this event. And so Rocchio does a beautiful job of always bringing us back just in a moment, never letting us forget that at the end of the story, 4 billion people die as a result of ending this war.
Unbelievable.
And that chapter is less than 2 pages. It's just unbelievable.
You know, I've noticed that it's not the 2-page chapters that don't have as much death. It's these like 3 to 5 page chapters that are more plot oriented, that are shorter. If you're getting a page and a half or 2 pages from Rocchio, he's about to tell you something really deep and important. The last time we had one of these sections, it was also deep and important. And so it may be a wise rule, actually, you know, it's a rule we're discovering here, that if we have a short chapter, maybe it's a signal for us moving forward into the audience here, the readers. If there's a short chapter, maybe we should really pause and really take the extra time, given that it's shorter, to really digest, because there may be something really important within the page and a half that's really easy to skim past that we should pay attention to. So
100%.
Yeah, good moving forward.
But we end there. None came for it, is said the matter closer. That's just the end of the chapter.
Yep.
It cuts it off from there.
Yep.
And we move on to chapter 28, Wrong. We get thrust into this scene in media res. Again, as with a lot of these chapters, no indication of how long it's been in between the previous chapter and this one. Hadrian is running away with a stunned arm because he's been grazed by a stun. He has stolen somebody's purse and is being chased by the prefects, who are this like militia cop organization that is chasing him down. He mentions the fact that at this point in his narrative, years have passed because he and his body wears that time in the form of badly healed bones and bruises. So despite the fact that Hadrian had all this access, his Palatine and his genetics are a step above everybody else's. Even when without the access to medical technology, he still feels the weight of the time he spent on the streets.
Yeah. This sentence of, I cannot say which day it was or how many months or years of my life had washed into those canals like so much garbage. We get this disjointedness that you've described at the start of this episode, at the start of this. We sort of feel this strange passing of time alongside Hadrian because he hasn't said it's been 4 years. It feels like it's all just kind of washing away in this sort of confused haze of begging. And now we're in the middle of some sort of theft all of a sudden where things are becoming a rush again. And so we're getting almost like a quick jump cut, very poorly edited montage of this section of his life that you can imagine that looking back internally for him, it's just like this hazy period where there's like these brief moments that sort of pop out of this period of time. And he's like, I'm remembering the crazy preacher and I'm remembering this time I was running away from these people. And then this event happens. It's very hazy for him. And so it's a clever way to portray that, giving us that feeling of confusion alongside Hadrian by Rocchia. It's well written in that regard.
And also points us back, another check mark in the ledger of Hadrian's memory is not perfect.
Correct. Yes.
Constantly we're getting this image.
Yes.
He escapes into this area where there is a cafe and has gotten there before the prefects have caught up to him. And so he sort of plays it cool, even with his like limp arm, and sits in this patio where there's not a lot of people, but he is not the only one on the patio. He is trying to act casual, but he understands that there's likely a camera that's seeing him, but he doesn't think that like there's no way with how big the city is and how many people are in it that the information is going to get to the prefects fast enough for them to be able to catch him.
Right.
He opens up this purse with one hand and then grabs these glasses and a hair tie and sort of ties his hair up and puts on glasses to sort of put on a disguise so that the prefects don't immediately notice him. He specifically only pulls out the physical cash. Like he leaves the universal card in the purse.
Yeah.
He only pulls out the cash from the purse and pockets it, which I think is a tie back to the idea that...
Do you think it's traceable? Is that essentially the issue?
No,
I
don't think it's traceable as much. It's a universal card, which he had mentioned is as good as cash. It's like a gift card, right? The Visa gift card with all this money on it, theoretically. But you have to go to somebody to extract that cash.
I see. That's where the issue is.
If you you can't go to an ATM. You can't go to somebody who you can actually. It's a liquidity problem. He can't utilize that. Because he, being a beggar and looking the way he does, he's going to be immediately thrown out of any situation where he could use the card.
I see. Yeah.
That's how I read it into this. But as he's doing this old man at this other table, or older, maybe middle-aged man, like, hey, buddy, I'm not going to tell anybody. Why don't you come over here? Talk to me. And he's wearing like this, I imagine him in like a full yukata, like Japanese style clothing.
Yeah.
Because he mentions that he looks like he's wearing Nipponese clothing, but he doesn't appear to be Nipponese. This is the kind of guy that I sort of envision myself being when I'm older. You're caught up on UFC stuff, or do you know who Yuri Prohaska is?
I actually don't know if I know who Yuri is.
He's this Czech guy that like read the Book of the Five Rings by Miyamoto Musashi and became a samurai.
Is that right?
He's the most... For anybody that doesn't follow MMA, do yourself a favor and look up Yuri Prohaska. This guy's the most interesting guy in MMA, and nobody can convince me otherwise. But he literally, post-fight, will wear he's an anime character in real life.
I love it.
But this guy gives me a similar vibe of sort of cyberpunky, Shinichiro Watanabe, Cowboy Bebop-esque figure who's a vaguely European or not ethnically Japanese looking guy wearing Japanese clothing. And Hadrian can tell that his accent is not Imeshi as well. But Hadrian pretends to be dumb, like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, I sat here because I was hungry or whatever.
Right.
And the guy's like, okay, yeah, that's why you have one arm and you had put all that stuff on and was digging out of that purse and you just got finished running a 5K. It's fine. Right.
Yeah.
And then Hadrian, spooked, is like, okay, I gotta get out of here. But the guy had literally just said, I'm not going to tell anybody. So just come and sit down. Let's talk for a little bit. The name's Old Crow. I totally forgot about Old Crow. I don't even remember this at all in my first
I don't
read-through.
either. Yeah.
But Old Crow convinces Hadrian to sit down for a little bit, maybe out of morbid curiosity. But for some reason, maybe it's his disguise, maybe it's the fact that he is sitting with Old Crow. The prefects have not noticed him yet. We just got out of a scene where a naked street preacher was being prophetic. And we immediately jump into a scene where this guy can look at Hadrian and determine and ask him like how long he has been stranded here on this planet. Because there's some of these people, this gives me again that Grecian oracle prophetic vibe of people that are speaking into Hadrian's life that shouldn't know very much about him, but are able to tell more about him than he gives off.
Yeah.
And in this case, Old Crow tells him, you know, I could tell that you're from space, that you're not from here. Like, you're clearly not from Imesh. You don't look like any Imeshi I've ever seen. He mentions that he stinks of space.
Yeah.
Just kind of an oxymoron.
Well, it's like, you know, he's giving off the vibes that he is a space traveler of some kind, or he's not from here. Like, I like that you stink of space because it isn't just like, well, I can tell because you're super tall and people here aren't. It's the whole thing. There's something about his aura that's like, something about this reads like you are not from here and you're out there. It's a more general thing.
Yeah, he is more prescient than that, though. You know, he asks how long Hadrian's been stranded here, and Hadrian mentions a couple of years. So even in the moment, Hadrian doesn't know how much time has passed. Not only does narrative Hadrian not remember, but Hadrian in the moment sort of is guessing generically at how long he's been on Imesh.
Yep.
And Old Crow mentions the fact that it must be hard. Hadrian basically sits down because he sees the prefects coming and he wants to hide. They talk about their origins, but Old Crow takes this sort of different view on origin instead of focusing on where he's from, because Hadrian asks where he's from. He's like, I'm from a lot of places, but where I'm going is I'm going to Askia in the Commonwealth. And the implication is that to Crow, where a person is going is more telling about who they are. The direction in which they're heading tells more about a person than where they have come from. It's a very forward-looking view.
Yeah.
Just as a note, if you look up in the back of the book, Askia is in the Lothriad, which now we've pulled, if we're looking deeply and truly understanding the book, Lothrian is a Russian analog because we've heard da as the affirmative word. It is listed as a commonwealth in this case and is tied specifically to Lothrian. So there is a group called the Lothriad where it's kind of vague at this point in the story, but this guy is heading there. And the vibe that I'm getting based on Dimitri Arello from previous chapters is Crow may be a smuggler. He's a spacer, sticks around for a long time. He doesn't seem like a guy who would be down on socialism necessarily. He's a free-winded, free-spirited, freewheeling, dealing kind of guy.
Reads people well, probably because it's required of him to be able to know if he's going to get screwed over by somebody. So he's got a good sense about people that would track as well. Yeah.
Then Crow turns the question on Hadrian, asking him where he's going. When Hadrian says that he's from Delos or whatever, Crow's like, stop, Simeon's like, no, I don't care where you're from. Where are you going? And Hadrian, in his moment, having been broken down by this world and having very little prospects, is like, I'm not going anywhere. Thinking that Crow is trying to sell him a product or sell him like
a way off
maybe
world or something like that. Yeah.
Trying to take advantage of him in some situation. Crow mentions that he's not selling anything. He's just trying to make conversation. And again, Hadrian has to, even though he's been broken down by this world and whatever, he always has to at some point look through his lens of the caste system filter. And he can't place where Crow is in the caste system. But he does, in that examination, find that Crow is a little drunk. And so now it's starting to piece it together that, oh, this guy just wants conversation because he's feeling a little bit more social. And maybe he's picking up on some of the language. The guy's like sort of, he'll leave off the end of a sentence or whatever as he's spouting these platitudes about how a man should be.
I want to read this next session because I think it's kind of powerful. He's speaking, this planet's a shithole, you know? How's a man supposed to breathe? Even the whiskey's wrong. He made a face at his mug. Wrong. It was precisely the word I had thought of 100 times since my rude awakening on this world. It was all wrong. The sunlight, the 2 moons, even the air. I could not have imagined my current state from the comforts of devil's rets, nor wish them on even the lowliest peasant. At once the stolen coins seemed a terrible weight in my pocket, a yoke upon my shoulders. I feel like this growing sense through this conversation that we have, become hopeless and complacent with where we currently are, and also sort of the weight of this existence and what it requires of Hadrian and kind of what it's turning him into. There's this sense that his unwillingness to look towards the future and consider a different option is reinforcing the fact that his existence at this point requires something like theft. There's the weight of the coins. He starts to feel almost the moral implications of his existence because he's considering the future for the first time through the course of this conversation. It speaks to why this stands out for Hadrian in his memory. It's important, I think, as a data point of insight. Not that this is a gigantic turning point, but it's a point at which almost the gears of his brain start turning and start to consider, even at a very subconscious level, something other than just surviving by stealing and begging. So this random guy with this small moment of kindness appears to have maybe given him the opportunity for an out at some point by starting that engine, even if it's really subtle thus far.
2 episodes back, you mentioned the idea of before Hadrian gets to the point where he has to focus on the immediate needs of survival, that he should, the plan was to do with that energy as much as he possibly could to figure out what the situation was happening before he had to solve shelter and food problems. It's clear in this moment that Hadrian's only had to worry about shelter and food problems the entirety of the time.
He's been stuck there.
And now Crow pulls him out of that to sort of look at the bigger picture of what Hadrian's future is supposed to look like.
Yes.
Hadrian asks Crow how he became a sailor. Crow says I was born a sailor. Yeah, a lot of us are born sailors. Yeah, I imagine this crusty smuggler pirate guy, right? He's like, you're not thinking about being one, are you? And Hadrian, of course, the only thing he thinks about in this moment, now that he's sort of jolted out of beggar mode, is like, there's nothing more in the world that I want than to be off this planet and to be, Simeon the Red and all this different stuff. Crow's like, life sucks. It's better to be a farmer or fisherman. Fugue sucks. Like, he mentions at one point, it's like, my bones hurt. Them fugue crushes, they don't make them like they used to. It's like this crusty old guy. But he looks at Hadrian in that moment and he asks him if he's thought about joining Colosso.
Yeah.
To which Hadrian is sort of put off by it. It's like, are you trying to recruit people for Colossus? And it's like, shit, no, I just like a good fight. It's very much a random encounter with an old man at a bar, but then it turns prophetic because he looks at Hadrian and says, you would be great at Colossus. You have the right build for it, but you shouldn't be a gladiator. Girls don't like a professional killer. And Hadrian thinks to himself, it's like, all the girls I know would only want to be with the gladiators and not with the myrmidons at all. And the narrator calls out that this was a prophetic moment. In 2 chapters in a row, we've got a prophetic moment that the narrator doesn't explicitly call it as prophetic. And then we have a prophetic moment that the narrator specifically calls out as prophetic. And if we remember from chapter 1 in the book to I'll go back and read it. Let's pull it up.
Go to the reference, folks. We're pulling a pin out. We're doing it.
To the poor people of Borosevo, I was a myrmidon called Hade, right? So we know that we're giving the indication from the author, if we're reading closely enough, that this is the inciting point that puts it in Hadrian in the moment's mind to go and join Colosso. So we know that directly Crow is involved in him becoming this myrmidon for the people of Borosevo.
Right. Yeah. We've been told that this happens, but Borosevo and Colossus, when we read them at the start of the story, they meant nothing to us. But if we are keeping close track, we now know that this comes to pass. If we were just reading this and not thinking about it, we wouldn't remember that he has already told us he's a gladiator or he's a myrmidon in Borosevo. But we actually know that that's going to happen now because of the 2 things being put together. So put a pin in this. We by definition will return to this because we know that this happens. So keep an eye on this. And we know it's because of this cool.
I love the frame narrative, dude.
It's great.
And I totally didn't catch this first read.
Yeah.
It's masterful going back to chapter 1 because he throws so much at you without going line by line and having read the entire series. It's impossible to pick up on the stuff that he's talking about there. But this is the first indication of he told us this at the very beginning.
Yep.
That this is going to happen.
Yeah.
And so we will see Hadrian become a Myrmidon in Borosevo imminently. It's going to happen at some point in this book. And then Hadrian in the moment is like, I'll consider it. Like, I'm not, okay, cool. Drunk guy thinks I should go fight. He's sort of debating whether or not to leave in this moment, but then he sees the khaki uniform of the prefects over in the distance and he sits back down. But then Crow makes it even a finer point and says, looking at Hadrian cannot continue on like this. The next time that he steals, going back to your point on the weight of the money in his pocket, the next time that Hadrian tries to pull this thing off again, the other person at the cafe may not be so kind to him.
Yeah.
But the next person may call the guards over and get him.
Or he may get killed at some point. This is a game that requires you to risk your life. I mean, this just means he would just have to run into the wrong person, and if he's hungry and tired enough and the person has a knife, and he could just be dead in a gutter somewhere for trying to steal from the wrong person, right? Truly. So it is a matter of time. You roll this dice enough, it just won't work out. So
yeah, you're gonna crap out at some point.
Correct.
Hadrian thinks to himself, okay, well, if I can't do this forever, then maybe I'll go with this guy. I'll ask him if I can join his crew. But then he thinks of Cat and he stops himself from even asking, and then rebuffs this guy saying, you don't know me. But then Crow's like, I sure don't, but folk ain't that different. And sort of he humanizes Hadrian in a way of, I've seen people in your circumstances before, and by looking at you, I can tell that you are meant for more than this thieving on the street. And what he means by that specifically, he says, it doesn't, he's not referring to the fact that he looks nobile, because Hadrian, the narrator, thinks that surely the guy thought it because I looked more nobile based on my genetics. But Crow specifically calls it out and says, nah, it's not because of your blood. It's because what a man does is what matters. Like, what you do is what matters, not who you are.
Yep. Who you are don't mean shit. Don't mean enough anyhow. It's what you do that matters. You hear? It's this like behavioral focused ethic rather than just a birth focused ethic that he's had throughout his life, where people keep telling him that this is your station, this is what you're supposed to do. And this guy's like, no, like it's about the things that you do. And this is freeing in some way because it means that there's a potential for a future, but there's also a condemnation amidst it as well, is because if it doesn't matter where you came from, but what you do that matters, it means you have hope, but it also means that you can't live your life stealing forever, because that means that's who you are, is the person who is stealing from people.
Yeah.
Right. And so it is hopeful, but is also convicting. So I think it's a sort of a dual reason that this is motivating for Hadrian, although he says, I didn't really hear the truth of this yet, but it sort of planted a seed within him for him to make a change at some point.
At that moment, the prefects he turns and like catches the eye of a prefect who's pointing directly at him, and he starts readying himself to run. And as he runs away, Crow says, you got to run. You got to go run. That's fine. But run somewhere, huh? Yeah. Run. Yeah. Don't run nowhere. Run somewhere, to hammer home his last point in the chapter. And so we've gotten two chapters in a row with an old man that has been prophetic to Hadrian's life, just in the midst of him being a thief in Borosevo.
I love this chapter.
Yeah.
It's so cool. I really just love the hopeful ethic of this guy, of, capturing Hadrian in this moment and just kind of shaking him out of it. It's like, dude, you don't have to do this. You are stuck. I hear you, but like, you have the opportunity for more than this if you will allow yourself to. It's a
very practical ethic.
Yes.
It's a very practical ethic.
Yes. Just do the next right thing, right? Or at least try to.
Right. That's 100% what it is.
Yep.
And to Hadrian's point, he gets caught up, and I feel this too, because I can, as a 4 on the Enneagram and as a depressive person, I can get caught up in the bigger things that I really have no control over or whatever. But really, if we boil it down, Crow's ethic is, do the next best thing and have a direction to go to. But then we begin did you have something else?
I was just going to say, this view of the future is important when it comes to depression and feeling stuck. You have to believe that something better is possible to even try. You have to be able to, and sometimes it's not straightforward believing that. And sometimes it takes a little bit of faith and effort to construct that, and a willingness to when you are in the middle of really hard stuff, there is this strange comfort in the negativity. There is a resistance to considering that there is hope. And if you can manage to do that in your hardest moments, you can claw out of them, but only because you can construct the idea that it is possible that there's a future worth clawing towards. Otherwise, you're just stuck forever.
Piggybacking on that and on what you do as a profession, most often that takes the form of somebody else who is down there with you telling you that there is a way out, right? Telling you that there is something different. It's because of the comforting aspect. Sure, there are people that have inciting events from an interpersonal level that realize that they need to change or whatever. But I will say just as often, having somebody call you out or speak that truth into you when you're in that moment, it is an effective way at pushing somebody to change to some extent, right?
And
like you sort of need somebody who's outside of it to pull you out of that comfort, even macabre as it may be.
Yeah. And it's a challenge, right? It is, you are challenging a worldview when you do that.
100%.
Right? And I like that it's portrayed this way because it doesn't flip a light switch for someone to change. It plants a seed, right? It's different in that way. And so we get it a portrayal. There isn't a moment here where Hadrian's, I agree. I decided then I was going to the start. That doesn't happen. It doesn't happen that way, right? It plants a seed for future opportunities, which is, I think, the way that this thing kind of typically happens. So I appreciate that it's portrayed that way.
Wow, so much deeper than I had initially thought.
I agree. Yeah.
But we move on to the last chapter of this episode that we will discuss, chapter 29, Less Wings to Fly. So again, another indistinct time skip here between the events of Talking with Old Crow and now. But Hadrian and Cat are out on the town. They are living large. They just went to the pawnbroker. They got rid of some stuff that they stole, and they've got fuller pockets than they've had in the story so far on the streets.
Feels like one of these moments of rare abundance that they experience for some reason. Yeah.
Yeah. A rare happy.
Yeah.
They're kind of on a date. Kind of,
yeah. Eating sandwiches.
Yeah. They stop by the back of this vat beef sandwich seller, which, I hate the vat beef terminology because it's gross and weird. It's probably totally normal for them or whatever, because the sandwich sounds so good. It sounds like an Italian beef or a French dip where the sandwich
French dips
dipped in the bread.
Yeah.
Oh, it's like, it's so good. But then you had to put vat beef in there to make me like pulled out of the moment and not hungry.
Well, it's interesting. It speaks to something about this. There's practical problems associated with feeding man across the stars. So maybe one of the ways that they've solved this is through the genetic modification or the genetic production, like the artificial production of
lab-grown meat.
Right. And so, this sort of
doesn't make me feel better.
Well, there's a small ethical quandary thrown into this sandwich discussion, which is your discomfort with vat beef versus the suffering of animal life. So it's an interesting way to just subtly be like, hey, vat beef, think about veganism in the Solon Empire or something like that. So,
well, it doesn't sound like it's veganism.
Well,
but it could be.
Is vat beef vegan though? Because there's no animal suffering associated with it if it's vat beef. Maybe if it's produced,
but it's animal flesh.
But is that
yeah?
Right, we don't need to.
We're not going to get into that.
Let's not do it. We don't have to get into.
We don't have a vegan on here either to adequately represent the other side. So,
question to put in people's head to answer a question: Is roadkill meat vegan? No animals were harmed because it was already dead, folks.
And with that, we'll move on, because now this vat beef sandwich has gotten even grosser than I initially thought. I got so happy at the sound it was an Italian beef or a French dip, but now
for the
it's
record,
gross.
I just want to, for the record, state that's based on a philosophy paper. I didn't just randomly throw roadkill meat into
you
discussion.
Nerd.
Yes.
As they're eating these, you sort of get this vision of like, he mentions the fact that they had to go to the back of the restaurant or whatever because they were too gross or dirty or whatever. But props on that vendor for not immediately turning them away and said, yeah, I'll meet you out back in just 5 minutes or whatever. They pay for the sandwiches. They get chips too, right? You get a sandwich and a bag of chips. That's something that everybody can relate to. Like, it's a very relatable experience. And this is a luxury for them. And so I love that they're having this moment.
Yeah.
And in this, as they're sort of reveling in the fact that, oh, I've got a full belly and like we're hanging out or whatever, Cat asks to hear about Hadrian's castle. So the narrator takes an aside at this moment to say that at this point, Hadrian had told Cat about where his true origins were. And initially she didn't believe where he was, that he was telling the truth until he showed her the ring. And that was enough for her, because she's Cat is very much a character of innocence in this story. I won't say ignorance. Innocence is the term that the narrator uses.
She's just a simple person, which is not a negative thing. Like,
her scope of vision is way smaller than Hadrian's is as Palatine.
Yeah.
But then seeing the ring, she believes that he is this, and now it all clicks and makes sense to her. Hadrian, thinking that Devil's Rest is just casual, everyday thing, says there isn't much to say. I've already told you my life story about how I escaped from there. And Cat is just looking for escapism in the day-to-day. She's not looking for the big melodramatic narrative arc of Hadrian studying Lothry under Gibson or whatever. She wants to know what it's like to sleep in a bed in a castle. She wants to know what the towers look like.
It's this sense of wonder and curiosity that she has, that it's not about Hadrian. She like, what is another planet like? Like, what does it
what does
look
the day
like?
in the life look like? Yeah. What does it look like? What is this world that I will never see?
Yeah.
It clue me in to a world I'll never get to see or experience.
He has a really good line, a couple lines about it. It was cold and everything was clean. It wasn't the sort of place that felt like people lived in, you know? Everything had a place and everyone too. It's this coldness. It sounds inhuman, you know, the way he describes it. It's more, it feels more human sitting here with this street person Cat eating this vat beef sandwich than the castle he used to live in. Really, it feels way more human on the street here.
Chris Verrocchio may vehemently disagree with my portrayal of what I'm about to say. And I'm saying that as a caveat.
Okay.
But the description in my mind that I have of Devil's Rest in particular, and of the court politics of Madois, these muted gray colors, the silvery sun and all this different stuff, gives me mad Denis Villeneuve Kaladin vibes. It gives me so much of that.
Before you started talking, it was like, it feels like Kaladin.
It does.
Yeah.
It does feel like that. And I know he does not like the movies, the Denis Villeneuve movies.
He can be wrong about some things. It's okay.
That's the vibe I get, right?
Yeah.
It's this, if you were to put this into film, I don't know, the descriptions that he has given us are very muted grayscale colors. And that's a lot of the same vibe as what's on Kaladin. Maybe Kaladin is a little bit more blue and green, Scottish Highlands type stuff. And maybe that exists. I mean, maybe the Summer Palace looks different, but Devil's Rest in particular gives me that grayscale. And it's almost as if you put a black and white filter on the world, and that keys into that cold, clean, people don't live here, sanitized sort of appearance. She keeps asking for specifics to try and get an image to her head. Like, were there towers that were there? Hadrian laughs. Like, yeah, of course there were towers. It was a castle. And then he shares the story of how Julian Marlowe, his ancestor 31 generations ago, built the castle, and like the story of his family history. They're cuddling while this is happening. And Hadrian is regaling her. It's a very Disney moment of like, let me tell you, I can show you the world, you know?
Yeah.
As he's telling her about this history or whatever, he mentions that he feels the ice inside of him crack just a little. And that Cat is the one who is breaking this inside of him. He then mentions that they had kissed a few weeks back. And so there's a budding romance that is going on between him and Cat. Shared experience, you know, they're kind of similar ages, right? They live, I mean, they're from very different states, but they have this shared street experience with each other, and they're companions at the very least, and they're getting really familiar.
I think this section, you know, these 3 chapters are really like, I think, the core of how does Hadrian turn around his hopelessness on Borosevo and decide to move into the future, because it isn't about the romance with Cat. It's what Cat means to him, because we didn't get the moment where they had their first kiss. We got the moment where the crack in his heart starts here, where things start to feel like they're
really
thawing. This is the moment where he starts to thaw out, not where the romance technically began, right? It's the moment where he's talking not about their relationship, but sharing in the wonder of discussing this play sway off in the stars, right? It's always in these situations, it feels like when he begins to share this experience of talking about the out there with others, it starts to reignite this flame in him. And so Cat, I think, is bigger than just a romance to him. She really represents this shared wonder and curiosity that is sort of bringing him back to life here in this chapter, that I think people can tend to miss and characterize this as a shallow, rushed romance. And I think that there's deliberate reasons why we're getting these moments and we're skipping past the other parts, because this is the important moment in their relationship as a start for what it does to him over the arc of the story.
That's beautifully said. It also speaks to his ethic too, right?
Hmm.
He's not one to kiss and tell. Like, he's barely telling us any details. He mentions a few weeks ago we kissed under a bridge in near the White District. That's it. Like, we don't hear anything else about it.
Other than, I think she kissed him, I think is something that he mentions.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's very minimal. We don't get a lot of details about that moment.
He tries his hardest not to objectify her, right?
Yeah.
Going back to his previous experience with women and previous experience seeing his family and Crispin deal with women. He wants to set himself apart, even in this moment.
Yeah.
But to your point, Kat then prods, like, she's momentum and movement in him moving away from this lifestyle, like you mentioned, right? She asks if he wants to go back to that life, because to her, it sounds amazing. It sounds like the grass is always greener, but literally the grass is greener from the other standpoint, right? Like, even Hadrian, presumably in the Chantries, in an Anagnos training cell, has got to be less hungry, less worried about shelter than he is in this moment. And so from her perspective, when she's only had to worry about those things since her mother died, any life sounds better than this. He immediately, at the moment that he is asked whether or not he wants to go back to that life or go back to Delos, he clenches his fist without even knowing it. And he says, of course not. Like, I don't want to go there. And then he recognizes that his hands are clenched and makes an effort to unclench them. But then she continues to push him. This life is shit. It is not the life that you are meant for. This is two people in a row that have looked at Hadrian and superficially in the case of Old Crow, maybe prophetically, and not superficially, knowing a lot about him as a person for years, right? Kat and him have had a relationship for years at this point.
Yep.
Whether or not it's been romantic is not that long, but they've known each other for a long time. She is saying, you cannot continue to live like this. The way you talk, the way that you are, you just belong in a castle, not on the street. And Hadrian shrugs this off, says, no, I don't. But she continues to press that issue. The narrator, Hadrian, then admits that at the moment, in hindsight, she was right that I was not meant for this life, but he couldn't in that moment. She asks him if he could go anywhere, where he would go. And the first thought in Hadrian's mind is, oh, to Cross, of course. Like, that was my plan. But then he thinks of the fact that he doesn't have the letter anymore and knows that it's impossible. And then he answers her question with a question, and we diverge in the story. And this is one of my favorite things.
Yeah.
In any story, and you'll see this a lot for those who are going to read or are reading Book of the New Sun. You get a lot of these moments, and they are it's way more arcane than it is here. This is very readable, and I appreciate it. Gene Wolfe at times will pivot and just talk about an in-universe story. Like, there are moments where Severian reads a book or a story from a book in the narrative, and then you have to not only decipher the words from the book, but also the words that Severian is giving you to the words in the book. It's really complex, but very, very
crazy.
Good.
I need to read that.
Hey, shout out to Alzabo Soup. Alzabo Soup gave me the idea for this podcast. I would not have gotten through Book of the New Sun without Alzabo Soup and understood anything. And maybe some people aren't meant to do it their first read through, but I did. And Alzabo Soup is amazing. Shout out to Phil, shout out to Metz. But Hadrian pivots this discussion about where he would go to the story of Simeon the Red. So we're getting read in
the full thing now.
Yeah. And Hadrian, of course, you've never heard of Simeon the Red. And, it's just so pompous. But
As we describe this, I think it's important for people to recall what has been Hadrian's dream and what is Hadrian's motivation, core values, because Simeon the Red, I believe, is core to that. And so as we talk about this, hold that in your mind because I think it's relevant.
Hadrian then goes into the story of Simeon the Red, and this is the first time as the reader. We've heard Simeon the Red so much, the story has been built up, but we've never been read into anything on who Simeon the Red is. We know him as this like mythological figure almost in Hadrian's life. And we know that he has some vague relationship with Xenobites and like a John Carter of Mars-esque story, but we get the true in-universe narrative here in this moment. Simeon the Red was a scholiast and a science officer in the Expeditionary Corps, and he was on a ship that was on one of the first voyages thousands of years ago, like maybe many thousands of years ago, into the Centaurus arm of the galaxy. So this is a time in the Empire in which the galaxy is still not all populated. Like we have not made it out to the outer edges yet. And so it's a Lewis and Clark-esque journey that Simeon goes on with this ship as they're surveying worlds to colonize. Before I continue in the story, Simeon the Red is clearly to me a little bit, maybe it's just the science officer thing, a little bit of Spock in there, right? He's a little bit of Spock. He's a scholiast that controls his emotions, that like, you know, is also the science officer on a ship. That was Spock's role in Star Trek.
Okay.
So it may be a little Spock there. On this journey into the Centaurus arm of the galaxy, they find freeholders and barbarians, like these anarchical societies of humans that have made it beyond the scope of the Imperium. And narrator Hadrian compares them to the Normans, who we know were conquered here on Emesh. Like the Normans had settled Emesh and had terraformed Emesh, and then the Empire came in, had a fight with them, and then took the planet over. As Simeon and the Expeditionary Corps are expanding, they either left them to be, they traded with them, or they conquered them in the name of the Emperor and then continued in the Outer Dark. I imagine it's the latter more than the other two, if I'm being honest.
Yeah.
But there seem to be all three, according to what the mythological version of this story is. They get to this new world that is a freezing cold mountainous world that is populated by giant birds and a race of flying Xenobites known as the Irktani. Simeon is fascinated with them and so then leads a mission as a scholiast to learn more about them. He begins trading with them. He learns their sign language and then eventually their language. Meanwhile, the other people that are on Simeon's ship have cabin fever. They've been out too long. They've been under ice too long. They long for home and for human women, and they mutiny against the captain. And as part of this plan, the mutineers were planning on taking the Irktani, who are Xenobites that have never been found. Like, this is the first indication and the first finding of this alien race. They were going to sell them into slavery because that's a very lucrative way for them to, like, they could be used in circuses, they could be used as attractions or whatever. And they were going to they wanted Simeon to be along with them, so because he was the only one to communicate them. So they were going to utilize Simeon to convince them to be sold into slavery. But they made a mistake in thinking that Simeon would go along with this plan. The moment Simeon finds out about it, he bands together the disparate Irktani princes and fights back against the mutineers. They retake Simeon's ship and they give him a cloak like their princes wore. And they tell him that it looks like his robe. And this is how we find out that the Irktani are somewhat colorblind, because the cloak that they gave him was red and not green. So they could not distinguish between red and green. As a colorblind person, I love this.
I love this. Right?
There's an episode, for those who've watched Adventure Time, there's an episode specific, like Finn is one of my favorite characters. Finn is also colorblind. Go watch that little arc and episode because it's handled very, very good.
Oh, interesting.
It's awesome. And so the Irktani are colorblind, but that's where Simeon the Red gets the name, is because he wears this red cloak over this green robe, because the Irktani have given it to him, and it's a thing of honor that the princes wore, but it is not the same color. Simeon then names the planet Judeca for the treason that the mutineers have imposed upon these people. And this name has a ton of meaning. Judeca, the name, is a direct reference to Dante's Inferno for the lowest layer of hell. And for those who haven't read the Inferno, the lowest layer of hell is a cold place that is In the center of it is a freezing lake in which Satan is eating 3 people, one of which is Judas Iscariot. The other is Caiaphas, and then the third is Brutus. So there are 3 people that Satan is eternally chewing on in the Inferno. And Simeon calls this planet, this cold, mountainous, rocky planet, Judeca, as a direct callback to Dante's Inferno.
The bottom circle relating to betrayal, and it's a whole thing. Yeah, I don't know how I didn't connect this. I've read Dante's Inferno, and you're totally right. That's amazing. That's crazy.
Points to his classics.
Yeah.
Again, something I did not catch until I reread this and then looked things up.
Yeah.
And was able to remember, that's exactly what this is.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the name Judeca, even for Dante, who called it that, comes from the name Judas Iscariot, which is the first betrayer in the Judeo-Christian worldview, or the archetypal betrayer.
Yes.
The Empire gifts Simeon the title of captain, and they provide him with a new crew. And Simeon continues to be as part of the Expeditionary Corps and continues their journey. And the Irktani have a detachment in the Imperial Legion. And the Emperor, Hadrian mentions, is even pondering citizenship for Irktani that have served in the auxiliary for 20 plus years. Just as a note on imperial stuff too, there's a lot of different, this is heavily influenced by British imperialism, I think. And I'm sure that Roman imperialism had something similar in terms of auxiliaries of different people that were conquered. But when I read this the first time, the first thing I thought of was that there are these there's a Nepalese auxiliary in the British Army. There's a guy, I don't know if anybody's seen there's a documentary on Netflix about this Nepalese guy who served in British Special Forces that was part of this auxiliary. But like for the conquered people that are part of a empire, it's a very high honor to be included in the army. And so even in Nepal to this day, there is an auxiliary in the British Army, even though ostensibly Nepal is not part of the British Commonwealth anymore. There's still a Nepalese auxiliary in the British military to this day. And the Irktani sort of fit that role in the Legion today. The Irktani have their own auxiliary where they fight on behalf of the Imperial Legion against the Pale.
Yeah. And something that I think it's worth tying this together a little bit with Hadrian. Hadrian has this dream of becoming a scholiast, focusing heavily on languages and communicating with and forming a relationship with the Cielcen to create peace.
100%.
Which is essentially exactly the story, which is that humanity was imperfect and immoral, but through Simeon's use of language and cooperation, he was able to guide us to a sense of cooperation and restoring the moral order because of his willingness to cooperate and communicate with a foreign species and stuff like that. So it's exactly the way that Hadrian is viewing the current conflict and what he aspires to be.
He wants to be like you mentioned, he wants to be the Simeon the Red to the Cielcen and bring them into the fold.
Yes.
Because he thinks that that there was just something wrong, like maybe we're not sharing space or whatever with them he believes that they have the ability and they will potentially, with the right representative that understands them, that speaks their language.
And a willingness to make peace.
And a willingness to make peace.
Yeah.
Hadrian then continues and asks Cat where she would go. She immediately says, like, nowhere. I'm here. I wouldn't go anywhere but here. And then Hadrian immediately says, I'm staying here with you too. But Cat mentions, you could go though. You could go. And then she lights up at the idea of like, you could take me with you. You could go, show your ring to somebody and get a ship and you could bring me along. And then reality sets in. And then she says that she knows that I know you can't take me. They have this quiet moment, sort of awkward pause. Cat then breaks that silence by saying that she would go to Lewin because her mother told her of fairies and silver trees there. Lewin is likely a reference to the word for blue in Tolkien's Elvish language from Lord of the Rings. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah, I think that's a reference there. Lewinle, I think, is the name of the blue star that sits in the sky or whatever. And you get the same image of like huge silvery trees that are larger than anything else. And fairies, we get this sort of elfish fae imagery that's evoked here that makes me think that it's clearly a reference to Tolkien. Hadrian keeping it to himself, very, very self-aware, knows that those quote unquote fairies are like a mechanism by which flesh-eating trees use to catch unsuspecting prey. But he doesn't tell, he lets us as the reader know that he does not tell that to Cat because he doesn't want to break her heart. Hadrian mentions that he wants to see Xenobites. He wants to be his own, he wants to have his own ship. He wants to be a captain. He wants to live like Simeon the Red. And in this very greedy moment, the Red to me is very, very greedy. Like, I want to see everything. Harkening back to, I want to understand the arcane. Hadrian's, I feel like he's greedy, like really greedy. Do you get that feeling?
I feel there's a little bit of that in there, but I also feel this is almost, like if anyone out there has ever started a lawnmower, like a gas lawnmower, the last chapter, we get the first rip and we don't get it. And then we get another rip. And then we do the Simeon the Red story. And it finally, as he rips it back, the whole thing just churns back to life. And it's just this explosion of adventurous energy where the whole thing comes out. He almost vomits, like, I want to see the whole damn thing. Like, he's expressing this idea of, I want something more than this. I deeply want my own ship. I want to go where I want to do. I don't want just freedom living here in this gutter. I want more than that. So to me, there's a sense in which it could be agreed in that he wants a ton, but to me, it almost feels like there's just been this compression or suppressed desire for adventure that he's had, that it all vomits at once because of the lack of expression of it. So I think actually maybe if he had been expressing this all along and capturing it, it would come out less like this, but I think it's just been compressed for so long that everything comes out at once, and it's almost like there's a reaction to that suppression where it's like I want everything, and so that's the way I interpret it.
That's a fair point, and I didn't consider that.
Yeah.
In the narrative too, to your point on the compression and the release, one continues to, like, he goes for 10 minutes uninterrupted on all the stuff that he wants to do. That Cat doesn't interrupt him either, right?
Yeah.
He just lets it all out. And this is the first time he's been able to be vulnerable with literally anybody on Emesh.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe not the first time, but it's to the ice cracking. Now it's cracked a little bit more because he's let Cat in on his dreams. And that is a very vulnerable thing for anybody in any relationship, but platonic or not. If you're able to bear out your dreams in front of somebody else, that's pretty vulnerable to know your truest heart's desire. And to your point, that's what he's sharing with Cat here.
And most people, it's kind of sad, but a lot of people don't really have opportunities to speak about things that they care about, things that they're passionate about, uninterrupted, without critical feedback from anyone. And it sounds like, Kat has done this thing where she's been like a person who relates to Hadrian and listens to Hadrian in maybe a way that he really hasn't been listened to really, we have Gibson, but Gibson,
since Gibson.
Yeah. So Gibson does this a little bit, but, I get the sense too that Gibson is kind of a guide. He gives feedback. Sounds like Cat is kind of just listening and just letting him do this. Gibson may have cut him off. Joy's a wind, Hadrian, calm down. he may have, but Cat listens, gives him this space. And, he mentions that I hadn't realized what I said was true until I'd spoken it. It's like this sense of, I didn't realize that I actually had wanted all of this so much until I had revisited it and actually gone through it again. So he is rediscovering it, and because of Kat's question and just what she's done to him. So it's great. It's a great moment, and it's the summation of these chapters that we've read today.
Mm-hmm. It's come to a breaking point.
Yeah.
Cat lets him go on this diatribe for 10 minutes, and then he finally finishes, and he can tell that she's sad. Hadrian asks what's bothering her. She mentions that now I can tell, as if I couldn't before, but this really lets me know that you want to leave. But in Hadrian's mind, his vision is, yeah, but we'll leave together.
Yeah.
I just got to find the money. We'll figure a way out. We'll solve it. I'll solve it. I just have to find the money and we'll get off planet. But then she says, no, I cannot. I am planet bound. And on my first read through, I didn't catch this. But if you look in the lexicon, planet bound is not just a word like, I don't have the means to get off the planet. It is a specific term by imperial decree of a serf who cannot leave the planet. So where Hadrian's blood would not necessarily let him leave the planet, because he is part of House Marla and part of, like, he would be seen. Cat cannot leave the planet because she is imperial property of the Count of Borosevo. So it's beyond a monetary problem. It is a problem of my station and my lot in life dictates that I cannot leave this planet. I am meant to be a serf. My children are meant to be serfs, and that's never going to happen until a Palatine uplifts my family or whatever. But Hadrian mentions that, no, I'm not leaving you here. I'm not going to abandon you. I'll figure something out. We'll pay smugglers, whatever it may be, and we will go and live out our dreams. We'll go to Lewin. We'll see these trees that you want to see. We'll go to meet the Irktani. And she can tell that he wants to see Xenos. And he's like, if you really want to see Xenos, you don't have to leave Emesh. Like, and he's like, what are you talking about? What? And she's like, you don't know dust about us, do you? Like, you don't know anything about us. You, like, clearly Hadrian has been living too pie in the sky and has had other problems, to be fair, that he has just not even asked about the idea that there could be Xenos on Emesh. And she leaves the chapter off saying, we got Xenos here. And that's just the end. Like, that's where the chapter ends. And we're sort of left on this cliffhanger of like, there is Xenos on Emesh.
Yeah.
What does that even mean?
Well, there's an excitement here with the fact that we've talked a lot about hypotheticals with alien life and world building and all this stuff, but this means we could actually see them, and there's an excitement that we sort of feel alongside Hadrian here. I think is like, oh, we actually get to see this, leading up to this chapter. Frankly, when I was reading, I didn't really consider the idea of, alien life outside the Cielson. And in this chapter, we get this explanation of the Irktani, who are like this strange, winged, slightly shorter than us, taloned alien race.
Yeah, it's the Rito for those Zelda fans out there. It's the Rito for sure.
It's a super cool alien race, but now we have the prospect of seeing something different as well in the coming chapters. So there's an excitement here with, it's like, oh yeah, let's get some sci-fi in this fantasy. That's fun. So we'll have to see what that actually looks like in the near future, folks.
And we will continue with Hadrian's story as we move on. But for now, that's all for us. We will continue on, always forward
and always down.
And we will see you folks next time.
See you folks.
Devil's Rest Book Club is Cameron Elston and Drew Welty. Today's episode discussed chapters 27, 28, and 29 of Empire of Silence by Christopher Rocchio, copyright 2018. Empire of Silence was originally published by Daw Books on July 3rd, 2018. Quality editing and original music by Cameron Elston. Find us on YouTube. Contact us at devilsrestbookclub@gmail.com. Devil's Rest Book Club is a production of Disquiet Pods. This episode, copyright 2025, Cameron Elston and Drew Welty. Thanks for joining us. And remember, rage is blindness.